Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, cha, bonjour, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jed Lee. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, located in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and so wicked happy that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in our mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, Audible, CastBox, Player FM, Boomplay, Ghana, wherever you find your favorite shows. Two fascinating guests for you today. Violet Duncan will be up first. She is here to celebrate Buffalo Dreamer. And later in the show, Kelly Fleming will be joining us to celebrate Your Friend, Your Nurse. Hey, my friends, we are really excited. Reading with Your Kids podcast is returning to the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, November 9th and 10th at the Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, Illinois. Let your imagination come to life at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, the ultimate family play experience. Dive into hands-on fun with the hottest new toys and games, meet the inventors behind your favorite products, and even get a sneak peek at what will top holiday wish list this year. From interactive play zones to exciting competitions and exclusive giveaways, there's something for every member of the family at the Chicago Toy and Game Fair. And don't miss the Young Inventor Challenge, where kids showcase their creativity and innovation. Who knows? You just might meet the next big inventor. Join us at the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, Illinois, November 9th and 10th. Whether you're a game enthusiast or just looking for a fun weekend with the family, the Chicago Toy and Game Fair has it all. And like I said, the Reading with Your Kids podcast will be there, and you may have a chance to be heard on the show. Get your tickets today and bring the magic of play to life. Visit shytag.com for details, and be sure to use the discount code READ, R-E-A-D, at checkout to save on tickets. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Snoodles in Space, Episode 2, The Zoodles Strike Back, written by Stephen Joseph and illustrated by Andy Case. In this third installment of the Snoodles series, the Zoodles are determined to have their revenge. With the help of a grimy millionaire who's fallen on hard times, they intend to poison the Earth's water supply and turn everyone into willy-nillys and dilly-dallies. Can Brianna and Ricky save the Earth again? Will the outcast kids on the other side of the track rise to the challenge and help save the world? You can find out with Snoodles in Space, Episode 2, The Zoodles Strike Back. Join us right now from the great state of Arizona, where the people there don't believe in winter. I'm really excited. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new middle grade novel. It's called Buffalo Dreamer. Please welcome to the show, Violet Duncan. Hey, Violet, how are you?
Danse, everyone. It's a beautiful day, and I'm so happy to be here.
Now, you have to tell me what language that was, because it sounded quite beautiful, and I might have to add it to my multilingual greeting.
Yeah, you should. It is Plains Cree in the Y dialect.
Plains Cree and the Y dialect?
Yeah, there's two. Well, the Cree are all across Canada, and there's Plains Cree, Bush Cree, Swampy Cree, James Bay Cree, OG Cree, and then the Cree language has several different dialects within it, and so I'm the Y dialect.
Now, the OG Cree, does that stand for old time gangster? Or the kids say,
the OGs, man. No, that stands for the Ojibwe Cree. All the Ojibwe Cree got together.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for you to tell us about Buffalo Dreamer.
Yeah. So, I wrote this book partially during the pandemic. It was at the time when my children were in school. Well, actually, no. It started in the summertime and when we were still trying to figure things out. School hadn't started yet and we were just kind of settling in and figuring out what we're going to be doing. And so we're in Canada, staying very, very far away from people. And we found out about the Kamloops Indian Residential School and that they had found the 215 buried or unmarked graves. And as they were sharing across the nation, it was ripping my heart apart because we were hearing about children as young as 3 years old in these unmarked graves and children who were 5 because that's the usual age and children who were right up to 12. And at that time, I had with me my 3-year-old. I had my 6-year-old, my 8-year-old, and my 10-year-old, and they all were those ages. And it was heartbreaking because they kept asking me, Mom, why are you so sad? Mom, what's happening? What are you looking at? And I realized we have to go further in our discussions about what residential school is. They kind of knew what it was, but in order to explain what unmarked graves is and why I'm so sad, we had to dig deep and start talking about what it was. And so as I was sharing with my children the history, their relatives that attended, I needed to also let it out in my heart because it was hard to talk about it, but I also just wanted to share everything. And so I started to write, and that's how this story was born.
There's so much to talk about. Tell us, please, why it's important not only for Indigenous kids to know about the history of the residential schools, but for all kids to know about that time and that period of history.
So this is not that long ago. So it did span 150 years, but people tend to go back to when it started 150 years ago. This is when it happened. But we forget that it was just my grandmother. It was my own father. It was my aunties and uncles that all attended the Indian residential school system. And it's my children's grandparents now. And I actually attended the Indian day school. That means that I didn't stay overnight, but we attended the school during the day. And that's a whole other thing. So when people meet me, they think when I talk about it, I'm talking about 100 years ago or 50 years ago, or great grandparents. And I'm like, no, this is my aunties and uncles. This is my grandparents. This is my cousins that attended these schools. And what happened in those schools was never positive. Nothing ever positive will come out because the whole point was stealing the children, taking away their culture, starting with hair, cutting their hair, taking away any identity. So any clothes, any cherished items that they were given, like jewelry or a stuffed animal or even a blanket, everything was taken away. And the food was terrible. And if you didn't eat the food, you were given that food again at lunch, and you were given that same food again at dinner. And so you had to eat that food. And you're coming from a community that eats wild meat and wild berries, and we don't really eat a lot of like flour, oatmeal, and that's kind of stuff that was made there. And so our children need to know that history tends to repeat itself, and we cannot have this devastating thing ever come back. And we also need to know and reckon within ourselves what is happening along the generations. Why are so many Indigenous people struggling and suffering? And we got to learn the trauma that goes with it. And so it's not just one-sided. This is not just a minority of people that can't, work a 9 to 5. It's understanding the deep trauma of why school never felt safe, why they didn't learn anything there, why the fall season is a traumatic event for them. This is the time that the children were taken viciously. For me, this is a time, when school starts. When I was little, after day school, I was excited to get a new backpack, maybe new running shoes. But my joy is definitely eclipsed by the trauma that happened to just my little cousin's parents and how they're trying to reckon with them themselves, being excited with them for kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2 when they realize, wow, when I was that age, this is what was happening to me. And trying to be excited for your children and trying to deal with that trauma, it's multifaceted. And if our children learn to understand that and have empathy, we all just become better people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is, as you said, history tends to repeat itself. I know my own ancestors in Ireland were, their language was taken away from them, and it's happened all over the world, many different cultures, and I think I agree with you. It's time for it to stop.
Yeah, and the best way is to just know your history. Know where individually, where you come from, where your family comes from. It's way easier to understand who you are when you understand where you come from, where your family is coming from. And I don't mean just like, this is my grandparents, these are my parents, these are my siblings. Where did your grandparents grow up? What did they learn? How were they raised? How about your parents? And actually, a lot of that trauma, when I was a teenager and trying to understand it, I had decided, no way, I'm not going to have children. This is too hard. I can't raise human beings, because it's just too crazy to try and parent and be a caregiver, when I keep seeing our own relatives not treating their children right because they weren't taught. And I had amazing, fantastic parents, but it still scared me, to even go near parenthood. It was actually my husband that was so in love with the idea of having children that I was like, okay, we'll have one and we'll see how it goes. And I mean, we had baby books galore. I did not want to mess up this kid. And we always kind of walk with our culture in one hand and modern society in the other hand. And we try to raise, now we have 4 children. And we try to raise them with this idea that we are living in 2 worlds. We are living with our culture and our identity as Native people, but we live also in this mainstream society with these different types of careers. And so when they go forward and choosing their career path, one says, when I grow up, I want to be a famous fancy shawl dancer, and then I'm going to do ballet. And I think that that's amazing, because that's our hope, is that they see themselves in both of these worlds living kind of seamlessly.
Yeah. The story that we're going to experience in Buffalo Dreamer, how much of this experience in residential schools are we going to read about?
So I didn't actually want too much of the school. So there's 0 of the actual school. And that's because my aunt, she can't watch or listen or read anything that has to do with residential school that happened in the school. It's too much trauma for her, and it takes a long time to kind of recover from that. And I wanted to honor her and respect her boundaries. So this story begins when the character is leaving the school and she's running away and she's turning her back on it and she's going anywhere. And I have so many stories from my aunties and uncles, my dad, of running away and trying to, get away from these schools. Of course, it was illegal to not go to school. If your parents took you out, they could be imprisoned. They could be, they wouldn't be able to see their kids in the summertime. And so it was never a good thing for runaways, but this is one of those what if stories. What if they ran away, and what if they got away? And what if they were in a safe place once they got there? How amazing would that be? And so we hear that story side by side with our main character, Summer, who is 12 years old. And it's based on my daughter trying to understand what the Indian residential school system is. Why would they take children? Why would they treat them terribly? what happened to these children now, and finding out that her grandfather is one of those children, and how does he feel about it, and learning how to be empathetic to his story, and learning that that's her own history. She's also learning, so it's tough.
Yeah. We love that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And of course, a reader being able to see himself or herself and their ancestors, their relatives, portrayed positively in a book would be so important. But I also think it's important for other kids to have a look into the window, to have a look into the history, but also the culture of Indigenous people here and throughout North America.
Absolutely. My very favorite pastimes are in the summertime pastimes are in the book. We have a moment when they're berry picking, and I don't include this part of the story, but I remember when I was with my grandmother, and you kind of talk over each other in the bush. And so you're not like really side by side, like sweet talking. It's like business to get berries. So you have the bucket, you attach it to your belt, and you kind of just go brum, 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 as you grab the berries and they pop into your pail. And you're trying to, for me, it was like rapidly trying to fill up these pails, because my grandmother was so fast and her hands were so soft that she would never I would have berry juice everywhere, and I would be trying to sneak berries, so my mouth would be all purple, and because they were Saskatoon berries, my favorite. And so it was like a business situation happening, and my grandmother would be talking about old times or telling me a story or gossiping or sharing what she's going to cook for dinner. And it was a really nice time to kind of just finally hear her talk, because normally, when she spoke, it was with adults and kids were kind of ushered out. And so I included that time in the book. And I think that one time what I said I didn't include was actually we were picking berries and there was a bear on the other side, and I didn't even see the bear. And she goes, "Oh, it's time to go." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess that's it." And so we get in the car and she goes, "Look." And this bear was just sitting there eating berries like grapes, like pulling the branch down. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's a bear here." And I was inside, I'm freaking out. And she's sharing with me how we kind of coexist, even with the animal world, that we leave space for each other. We don't bother each other. And that's definitely a wild animal. So we leave. Well, we're not trying to scare it away. But that moment of picking berries with her grandmother is in there, and that sweet time. Picking sweetgrass is in there. That is very special to me, because that exact story moment is what happened to me when I was picking sweetgrass. And just, of course, cousin love. She's trying to solve the case of what happened at these schools with her cousin. And that's my favorite part of summertime, is just either trying to solve something with my cousins or going swimming at the lake or anything, sleeping over. That's what summertime for me is cousin time.
You know, if folks listening can't see you, through the magic of technology, I can see into your home, and you have such a radiant smile as you're speaking about the book, and also when you're speaking about the time you spent with your grandmother. And I think that is one of the things that I think is missing in a lot of kids' lives. My grandmother was absolutely one of my best friends growing up. We'd go to see the WWE together, and she'd ride in the back of my motorcycle, and someone tried to rob her one time, and she beat the tar out of him. But we had this beautiful intergenerational friendship, and I learned a lot, a lot of things that a lot of people my age, it's like, how do you know about that? That happened before we were born. It's like, oh, I had a grandmother. We talked, we shared stories, much like you and your grandmother did while you're picking berries. My kids were blessed in that they were able to, my mom helped raise my kids before she passed, and my kids were able to spend time and get to know my wife's parents, and thankfully her mom is still with us. But a lot of kids, because of our modern world, were spread out. And I don't think that intergenerational friendships are really encouraged these days.
It is a shame. I know amongst a lot of Native families, because there's not a lot of housing on the res. And so you end up living with cousins and uncles and aunties, sometimes for a season, sometimes for a year, just because there's a lack of housing for all of us. People grow up and they fall in love or they fall out of love. And my mom and my mom and dad always had an open door policy. Anybody needed a place to stay. There was extra bed, there was the couch, there was the floor. They would even have like a tent that they would put up or the teepee that they would put up. So they never turned anyone away from staying at our house. And we try to have that approach too. It's different here in the city, because people don't really stop by for tea like they do on the res. And, so I think being on the res definitely encourages those relationships. Sometimes you get chewed out, because it's like big people talk, but, we still kind of eavesdrop. And I even have that part in the book where the main character is eavesdropping on the older aunties chatting. And that's how we kind of navigate without having to talk directly of what happened to so-and-so. And, you kind of just find out through stories and what happened at the band office or what happened while I was picking berries or who and so-and-so was dancing at the powwow. That's how we share. It was like before Facebook. Facebook existed in the kitchens of the res.
Yep. Yes. And I grew up in the inner city of Boston, and all of my relatives were within 5 or 6 blocks on both sides of the family, which was beautiful, but it was also a pain in the neck because, boy, I couldn't get away with anything. And I would have these random adults come up and give me a dope slap in the back of the head. And I'm like, you can't hit me. I'm your uncle. Oh, what do you mean you're my uncle? But it was that kitchen was the place that was the center of all the action that happened.
Yeah. That's, well, also because on the res, the houses are so small. So the kitchen is the dining room, is the living room. That's it all. It was open concept before open concept was a thing. It was all in that kind of small space, but it was also, when I say, I was taught how to make bannock by my cookum, it wasn't like a sweet, like, this is a cup, we're going to do this. It was like an assembly line of, if you're going to make bannock, you make bannock and you follow her and you copy her, because there's always a gathering. There's funerals and weddings and, beginning of school and somebody's birthday. And so there's always like commotion and something happening in the kitchen. And so you learn quick and that happens. And if you want to be a part of it, you have to be doing something like cooking or cleaning or helping in some sort of way. And especially if you want to get like in on the gossip, me and my cousin would be like washing a fork forever trying to listen.
I have a question. I'm curious. One of my favorite, TV shows in recent years was a show called Reservation Dogs. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you had a chance to see it and what you thought of it.
Absolutely, yeah. We were watching it as it was coming out. We had to wait a whole week for the next episode.
Isn't that annoying?
Yeah, it was terrible. It was like worse than olden times of 2009. But I love that show. Because, so the res looks a bit different than my reserve, because that's in Oklahoma and my res is in northern Alberta, Canada. So their res is different. Ours is like, there's a field between each house. So we're so it was really good for isolation during the pandemic because you're like a mile from everyone. And then everybody you can tell our driveways are so long. You can see who's coming and like wave them in or wave them away. Before they get like even halfway. But Reservation Dogs was fantastic, mostly because it was an all-native acting crew, producing crew, writing crew, and tech. And the reason why it's important to have all those facets as Native people is because you're comfortable with sharing and with saying if something doesn't feel right, you don't have to explain the cultural relevance to it. People are just like quick to understand. Oh yeah, I didn't catch that. You're right. Let's do this. And the writing is so relatable because we kind of all have like that uncle or that auntie, or, the health services is definitely like that on the res. It's very slow. Everybody knows everybody's business. So it was really fun to see that being rolled out and to see young people, because that's a generation that I'm not a part of. I feel I'm too adult for those kids. And I'm like, is that where our kids are at now? And my daughter doesn't get to see it because there's a lot of swearing on there. But my 11-year-old daughter, I did show her the part where they were eating the hot chips and she's got a stomach ache and she goes to the hospital. And I was like, you see, that's what's going to happen to you if you keep eating those hot chips. So that was an example. And it was cool for her to see as like a Native kid, seeing another Native kid in that context. And yeah, it's a good one.
I really enjoyed it. There was something, and I'll be honest with you, I was crying at the end of every episode. And I just sit there and I'm like, why? It wasn't necessarily sad. It was a really, a wonderful, series. And, I was very disappointed when it ended. But what would you like your dream for Buffalo Dreamer? What is in terms of, who do you want to be reading this book? Where do you want it to go? Do you hope that someday it becomes a film?
Oh my gosh. Well, step one is that Buffalo Dreamer becomes a stepping stone into understanding the Indian residential school system, to understand, to begin to learn about it, because there are fantastic books out there, starting from, a board book all the way into nonfiction about the Indian residential school system. And I hope that Buffalo Dreamer will be a stepping stone to starting that conversation, to starting that learning, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, whether you're an educator. This is how you can definitely learn more about it and find out who's affected, because it's in real time right now. The little girl is of this age right now, and the grandparent is my dad, and he's still alive. Like, these characters are still, this is not 100 years ago. This is not even 50 years ago. This just happened. The last school closed in 1996. So, these things are happening. We are uncovering unmarked graves right now. Like, it's happening all across Canada and the United States. So I think it's a really good idea to brush up on history and use Buffalo Dreamer as that stepping stone. Now, if I ever hoped and dreamed for Buffalo Dreamer, I would actually want to see it as an animation. That would be my dream. Just because there's like a buffalo that talks and there's like these dream sequences that I think could be really, really magical. And I learned, I got my book as an ebook, so we got to pick narrators. And I learned that Indian country has a vast amount of narrators, like voiceover people. And it makes me very excited to see the selection of voice coming. Even I'm Taino, half Taino. And there was even a narrator that was Taino. And we are like the smallest nation ever. And it made me so proud to see people of different tribes, being there, being available. And so, yeah, it would be my dream come true if Buffalo Dreamer could become an animation. That would be amazing.
Well, let's encourage everybody to write to your favorite movie producer or cartoon producer. I don't know. Wait.
Write to Sterling Harjo. Come on.
There you go.
I have to get into animation here.
Well, let's tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Buffalo Dreamer and find out more about you.
Yeah, my very favorite place is Instagram. I regularly check my messages and post some fun stuff there. I'm at Violet Duncan, or you can check out my website, www.violetduncan.com. Those are two of the best places. Facebook works, but Facebook, like I get so many comments from my mom and dad on there. They're like, yeah, we love you. So I'm like, oh man, I'm trying to look professional here. So yeah, so Instagram and website, message me there.
That's wonderful. Violet, I really hope that this is just your first visit, because I'd love to have you back on the podcast. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And remind me how I say hello.
Danse.
Danse?
Yeah, perfect. Danse.
Danse. And well, I'm saying goodbye to you now, so how could I say goodbye to you?
There's no word for goodbye, but there's a word for we are done, and that means examaga. Examaga.
Examaga. Well, we've had a great time speaking to the author of Buffalo Dreamer. Our guest has been Violet Duncan. Violet, examaga.
Hi. Thank you so much, everyone. Naskomitin. I appreciate you being here.
This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Princess Naomi Helps a Unicorn, a dance-it-out creative movement story for young movers. Unicorns and horses and snakes, oh my! Interactive movement wrapped up in a charming story of sibling angst, anger management, compassion, and triumph. Fed up with her annoying sister, Naomi storms out of the castle, only to discover a unicorn in need of help. With a sense of purpose, she quickly forgets her anger. Princess Naomi is just one of the many wonderful books you can find at onceuponadance.com. A mother and daughter duo with a passion for dance and storytelling. They strive to share joyful movement, honor the beauty and discipline of ballet, and foster freedom of expression. Check it out today, onceuponadance.com. Join us right now from beautiful Santa Cruz in California. Our guest is here today to celebrate her new children's book. Is called Your Friend, Your Nurse. Please welcome to the show, Kelly Fleming. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the show. What a great name for a children's book.
Thank you.
Yeah. What inspired you to write this book?
When I was in the pediatric intensive care unit, I took care of a 15-ish month old boy who came in with a newly diagnosed brain tumor. So had never been in the hospital. Parents had never been in the hospital. He was terrified, rightfully so, as were the parents. And with these new patients, it's often very hard to break that barrier of fear, because you walk in the room and most likely you have to do something to them. And 15 months is a big stranger danger age, so it can be challenging. But they're there, unfortunately, for a reason, and we have to do what we have to do to take the best care of them. So he had a little stuffed animal puppy with him. And so I just tried doing everything to the puppy first. I just kind of ignored the patient and just talked to the puppy as if that's who I was seeing. And fortunately, what I was doing at the time wasn't anything painful or scary. It was just routine, take the temperature, blood pressure, simple things, but nonetheless scary for a child. And so once he saw that I was doing it to the dog, he, would lift his arm up so I could put the thermometer under his arm. And from that moment on, I could basically do anything with him. And there was no fear. I got it. I earned his trust. And so it got me thinking how scary it is for these kids, and how eventually, once the initial fear wears off, we are in a position as nurses to be their friend and guide them and have them look to us as a source of comfort, as opposed to just always doing something scary. So the idea came to me of a children's book, but I was young and I thought nothing of it. So fast forward, 6-7 years later, and I had a daughter of my own, and everything is in book form. They teach you, from day one, they say to read to your children. And so when we go to the bookstore, there's a book on absolutely everything you could possibly imagine for children.
Mhm.
But there wasn't one for kids in the hospital that's explaining what the hospital life is like. And on one end, that's great because you hope most kids don't need that book. But there are a lot of kids who need that book and a lot of parents who need that book to guide their children through whatever situation they're in. So I had just taken notes in my phone over the years and one day just thought, okay, I'm going to put this into a book form and see what I can do with it. And I talked to my cousin who's the illustrator on the book. He's been an artist. He was an art teacher. I asked him if he wanted to do it with me and we did. And I'm so happy we did.
Awesome. Awesome. I forgot to mention at the top of the interview that you are a pediatric nurse.
Yes.
And so these are based on true stories. And that instinct to take that young child, that young scared child's stuffed animal, and to treat the animal first, is that something that came to you instinctively, or is that something they taught you in nursing school?
No, I think it was a combination of instinct and having just been around children outside of the hospital. At that age especially, you can't talk a 15-month-old through what you're doing. They just don't have the comprehension. And so I just figured if this is something that makes him feel safe and I do something to this animal that's not scary, maybe he'll associate that with, oh, it's not going to be scary or hurtful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. I had no idea if it was going to work, but it did. And it changed his whole hospital stay because then it was, you at end of shift, you give report to the next nurse coming on and there's always a section of, what works best for comfort for this patient. And in this case, it was just ignore the patient and focus on the puppy. And then he starts to think, oh, I kind of want to play. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't eliminate all the fear by any means, but it made it so we could form a relationship. And it was really sweet. I mean, I still talk to his mom today and he's doing great.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
When I first got the pitch to have you on and I saw the title of your book, Your Friend, Your Nurse, I said, yes, absolutely. Because I had about a year and a half ago, I was in hospital for about 6 weeks or so.
Oh, wow.
And there were, and all of the nurses, but one in particular became my friend. Mm-hmm. And it was somebody who I could trust.
Yeah.
Somebody who I could ask questions of, especially questions that I didn't know if the doctor was giving me a straight answer. And I trusted her. It was a very different relationship than the one I had with the doctors who came in, checked a few boxes. How you doing? Here you go. And then they're out the door. Whereas a nurse, you're interacting with the nurse 5-6 times, maybe more during the course of the day. It's not as rushed. And no offense to the doctors. They were great, but, it just didn't seem that they were as interested and invested in me as the nurses were.
Yeah. And we spend, especially if you're in an intensive care unit in California, I know other states have much larger patient to nurse ratios, but in California, the hospitals I've worked at, if you're in an ICU, it's either one nurse to one patient or one nurse to two patients. So you see your nurse all day, all night, whether you want to or not. And the great thing about that is we do get to form this really special relationship with patients. And you want to know you can trust somebody in the hospital because it can be a very scary place. Mm-hmm. So it's our honor as nurses to form those relationships with patients. And it doesn't happen with every single one, but when it does, it impacts the family and the nurse. I mean, like I said, 8 years ago, I took care of this little boy and I'm still in contact with him and his mom.
Yeah.
So they truly can be very long lasting relationships.
Yeah. So that brings up the question. Now, I was in human services for about 8 years, almost 100 years ago, a long time ago. I had to leave, and I left and I became a professional clown for 35 years. And it was the best thing in my life to do because I was heartbroken working in human services, and I was working with kids who were in the juvenile justice system. And I was told I was doing a good job at it, but it was like, it's killing me, you know?
Yeah.
How do you deal with it? Cause I mean, you have, you're with kids who are facing life and death situations. How do you keep yourself and your heart healthy?
The biggest thing, well, I took a break.
Okay.
I worked in the pediatric ICU for almost 3 years, and I was young. I was 22 when I started, and I thought, this is not sustainable. This is too much heartbreak, too much awful stuff that these children have to go through. And so I took about a year off and I moved back to where my family is. And I was in LA at the time, and I moved back to Santa Cruz. I thought I was done. I thought, this is just not a life I can live. I can't see this every day. And I didn't know how to leave work at work. And so after I took the year off, I thought, well, I think maybe I want to go back. And when I started a new job, still not nearly as intense as an intensive care unit, but we still deal with very critically ill children. I just realized my life outside of work had to be fulfilling and simple, and sweet to make up for the sadness and the unfairness of what happens in a children's hospital. So there are some days, especially now that I have a child of my own, there are some days where I leave work and think, I don't think I'm going back. That was too much. I can't compartmentalize this situation. And then you take a couple days off and you think, okay, I can go back. I was actually, right before I took care of, Carter was the patient's name who I took care of with the brain tumor. It was about a month before I took care of him that I was going to quit. I thought, I cannot do this job. And I took care of him and I thought, oh, it just takes one patient to completely change your mind about why you're doing it and if you can continue to do it. I don't know. I don't think nurses get the, not acknowledgement of their profession, but the acknowledgement of how hard it is. And I mean, I've worked with the most incredible people, and you want to scream from the rooftops how hard these people work and how incredible they are to families. And you figure out a way to do it or you stop. Mm-hmm. Because once you lose sight of that, you shouldn't be in it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Nurses they're nurses are superheroes.
Yeah.
Especially nurses in ICUs and nurses who are working with critically ill kids, and nurses who are working with elderly folks.
Oh, yeah.
You know, end of life treatment. This is because, as you said, my problem again in human services, I couldn't leave the job at the job. I took it home with me, and my life was becoming not so happy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to be able to go in and have compassion, and love, because you can't just go in there and be a robot.
No.
You have to care about the kids and to be able to keep yourself sane and to do that day after day. That's superhero stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that kids in these ICUs and facing these life-threatening illnesses, they need a book like this. And I absolutely agree. You know, books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And so for a kid to be able to see himself or herself in the book, being, you know, having that superhero courage and strength, that's wonderful. But I think it's just as important for kids who aren't in the hospital to be able to read a book like this and to have conversations with their folks about, gee, there are kids out there. I'm pretty blessed. And I have to have empathy for kids who are going through these struggles.
Yeah. That is so important because, again, you don't want to know what happens in children's hospitals. You don't want to think of what kids go through, but we have to.
Mm-hmm.
And not only for the kids, but for the parents. Because as a parent of a sick kid, and I'm not speaking from personal experience, but from what I've seen taking care of kids, because you take care of the whole family,
right?
Especially with children. And some of these parents just feel so isolated. And the incredible thing is most times families that are in hospitals for a long time form and really incredible relationships with other families there because they're the only other people who can really understand and walk each other through whatever they're going through. Because as a nurse, when people ask what I do for work, and I give a very simple answer. And then when they ask more, it's like, oh, I can't hear this. You know, this is just, I can't even go there. I don't want to think about that. So I know families feel that 100-fold because it is too much for some people to hear about. And for people who have a healthy child, they don't know how to communicate with families of sick kids. You know, do you want to talk about it? Do you not? What do I ask? What do I not ask? And I think it's the same thing when you see a sick kid or you see a kid who's different. People get stuck. You know, do I acknowledge it? Do we just act like nothing's happening? So it would be wonderful if kids outside of the hospital who have never stepped foot, hopefully never have to step foot inside one, can at least say, hey, I'm not scared of what you went through. I'm here for you.
Yeah. I know when my last job in human services was working at a school for kids with severe developmental disabilities.
Oh, yeah.
And, man, my friends especially my friends who had young kids would run away from me like I had the plague.
Yeah.
I just work with them. I don't,
right.
You're not going to catch anything from me. It's not contagious.
Yeah.
How do what keeps you going?
The kids.
Yeah.
I mean, you see, especially in the area I'm in now, we have a lot of kids who have received heart transplants. And once they receive a heart transplant, they keep coming back to us on a schedule for biopsies of their heart, just to make sure there's no signs of rejection, that everything's going well. So you'll see these kids who get heart transplants at 6 months old, and they come to us until they are 18, 19, 20, 21 and can transition to an adult hospital. So I've been there almost 7 years. In a couple weeks, it'll be 7 years. And so we've watched these kids grow up, and it's incredible to think that you can put a new heart into a child, into a baby, and they grow up with it. Yeah. And those are best case scenarios. And we wish we saw only those. Yep. But you see, like you mentioned, these kids are incredible. Yeah. And what you see when they're so sick and there is a question of, will we see them again? And then you do, and they're walking in the hallways and you're like, oh my gosh, I really didn't think that was going to happen.
That's wonderful. So
you have to hold on to those stories.
Yeah.
And then you have to have an endless supply of empathy and love for the families that don't get the happy ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, cause that's the reality of it. That's the last page in the book. The last 2 sentences was the first note I wrote in my book, because it says, we're going to be friends forever, you and me, even long after you've gone home, wherever home may be. And my intention was, home isn't always home. It's not always at your house with your family. And some families don't get that version of home. So it was, the hope with this book was, if a family doesn't get to take their child home, they can take this book that has their children's handwriting in it and a moment that they shared together that they get to keep forever. They get to take this home knowing they did this with their child.
Beautiful.
So I wanted to just include every outcome.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful. I love that you've created this book. Are you planning on creating more children's books?
I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to figure out what would be another helpful one, impactful one. Because the joy, I had no clue how this book would be received or if it would have the impact I was hoping it would. And the first person that outside of my friends and family who are very sweet, who all bought the book, but that was just them being kind and supportive.
Right.
The first family I heard from who bought the book, who had no idea who I was, found out I worked at the hospital they were staying at. And so they asked everybody in their unit if they knew me, if they could get a hold of me. And we all have work phones. And so you log in when you're at work. So I logged in one morning and I had a message from an occupational therapist who said, you don't know me. I don't even know if this is you, but did you happen to write a children's book called Your Friend, Your Nurse? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, a family on the oncology unit, they're raving about it. Is there any way you could come up and meet them? And so I went upstairs and I met them, and it was a 2-year-old boy who has cancer. And they just said, we heard about this from another family, and this book is incredible. It's changed our outlook on how we approach things with our son. He's 2. And they have, the mom is part of this organization who builds or creates wagons and carts for other families in the hospital. And so she said, we put it on our resources page for these, because again, with cancer diagnoses and some kids are born with conditions. So they don't have that period of, oh, this is new, because it's from birth, they are part of a hospital system. And a lot of times with cancer, that's not the case. It's, a new diagnosis for a 15-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. And so it is very shocking to go from life outside to life inside a hospital. And so the mom was like, we were that family that our son did not have cancer until he was 1.5 years, 2 years old. And it was so sweet to see it reach somebody and it reach exactly who I was hoping it would. And that they then now get to pass it along to other new families, or a family who's just like, we're struggling trying to ease the fear of this life. So that was like, okay, this is exactly why I did this. If you're the only family I ever meet, it was worth it.
Awesome. That's beautiful. I want to suggest everybody check out Your Friend, Your Nurse. Hopefully your children are wonderfully healthy and will never have to spend a night in the hospital. But they should read this book. And if you pick up this book, why don't you pick up 2 and donate it to a local children's hospital?
That would be wonderful.
I think it would be really, really helpful. Kelly, can you tell everybody where we can go to find out more about your friend, your nurse, and find out more about you?
The book is on Amazon, and Mascot is the publisher, so you can find it from Mascot Books. And there's a little blurb about me on Mascot's website. Barnes & Noble online, most major retail bookstores have ordered it and carry it online. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really great. We've had a really powerful time speaking to the author of Your Friend, Your Nurse. Our guest has been Kelly Fleming. Kelly, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids, and we hope that you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Want to make sure that you don't miss any of the show? Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your favorite shows. And of course, you can also find the show at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. We want to start by thanking our guest, Violet Duncan. Please be sure to check out Buffalo Dreamer. Also want to thank Kelly Fleming. Please be sure to check out Your Friend, Your Nurse. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady, Rayling Tang. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.